Hi, everyone. Happy Thursday. I'm back. You're back. Broadcom is back. OpenStack is back. What else can we actually talk about? It's Techstrong Gang. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Techstrong Gang. I'm Alan Schimmel. Happy to be back here in the seat in our Boca Raton studio headquarters. As I mentioned, we've got news on what's going on at VMware, what's happening with OpenStack, and we also have an interesting segment from Bonnie Schneider on controlling Scope 3 emissions. And a lot going on there. It'll be a great Techstrong Gang. We've got a great gang lineup as well. Let me introduce you to who we have on for today. First of all, joining us from out in Las Vegas at the it's a VM World, I guess, or something like that.
Yeah, VMware Explorer these days.
Oh, VMware Explorer. Okay. He's been filing a ton of articles on this across the Techstrong sites. It's our Chief Content Officer, Mike Bizard. Hey, Mike, welcome.
Good to see you as always.
Thanks for joining us early out in Vegas. Speaking of early out west, next is our man he has his finger on the pulse of Silicon Valley, our roving editor, John Swartz. Well, spiffy with a new haircut. Hey, John, how are you?
Oh, hey, how's it go? Yesterday we did a all remote show. We missed you, Alan and Mike,
yes.
But we did an all remote show. Really interesting.
I did actually watch it, and it is cool. I'm sorry I couldn't make it. I had my own misadventures in airports in New York, but we'll leave that for another day. And then moving from the West Coast to our Colorado crew. Happy to have back on. Well, he was on actually too, but it's his first day back with me. Mitchell Ashley, our CTA and CTO here at Techstrong, CTA with Futurum Group. Hey, Mitchell, great to have you on.
Good to be back. No space flights from SpaceX, but good to be back.
Absolutely. Also joining us from Boulder, the Republic of Boulder, Colorado. Camberley Bates.
No Scope 3 emissions from Boulder. I'm just wondering.
Yes, we can go over controlling Scope 3 emissions in Boulder because they've outlawed all emissions in Boulder. You're not even allowed to exhale.
Just those things.
Camberley Bates. And Camberley, you're a CTA at Futurum as well. Is that correct? Yes?
Yep. And analyst, yep.
Absolutely. Great to have you on, Camberley. Thank you. Joining me here in our Boca headquarters is our sustainability and green IT analyst and editor, Bonnie Schneider, and she is going to be talking about controlling Scope 3 emissions today. Bonnie, welcome.
Thanks, Alan. Great to be here.
Great to have you. All right, let's jump into it. Mike, well, let's throw it out to you. You're covering, was it VMware Explorer, VMworld Explorer, whatever. I know Broadcom CEO Hock Tan spoke yesterday. I think it was yesterday. My days are all messed up from my travel adventures, but
it would have been Tuesday.
Yes, so it's Tuesday, 2 days ago. But, give us the scoop from out in Vegas.
Well, I got to say, it's been entertaining at the very least. About 5 minutes into his keynote, Hock Tan from Broadcom, who's the CEO, stood up and, it was surprising in the sense that he was actually rather charming, and he has a reputation for being, rough and tumble, but he was funny. And one of the things he got up and said was that everybody in IT is suffering from PTSD because CEOs had these edicts that says thou shalt get rid of your data centers, move everything to the public cloud. And now they're struggling with cost issues, complexity, compliance, and everybody's kind of not having a great moment. And all of this was to point to VMware Cloud Foundation, at least the latest version of it, which, to be honest, has always been a bundle, right? They have compute products, storage, and networking stuff. And but they were never tightly integrated. And now, finally they're getting around to that, and they got rid of like a dozen consoles, and now you can have one console to manage this thing. And that's probably a step in the right direction. I might argue overdue, but Camberley, let me kick it to you, because I know that, you've been around this public cloud thing for a while. And so, are the cloud service providers responsible for all this PTSD we're suffering? What's going on?
Well, first of all, as a military family that I've been in, I kind of object to him using that terminology.
Amen.
So I, especially since I have got a nephew that was shot in Afghanistan, my father took shots in Vietnam and World War II. So, sorry guys, but that's not PTSD. Maybe there's a layover of saying a little regret for some decisions that have been made because of the cost. But I don't think anybody's going to violently take somebody out because they moved to the cloud. But with that said, let me move on to something else that didn't have me visually reacting to what was said. I think that we've been into talking about consolidation forever. Consolidation has always been a savings, but the flip side of consolidation is vendor dependency, blast radius, all those kind of things. So it's a natural progression for VMware to more so bundle. I mean, initially they were selling vCN separately and NSX separately, but if they're not going to sell those things separately, by gosh, they better put it into that entire system and bundle it all together and make it more efficient and effective for them to utilize. So it's a question about how does the enterprise want to implement these systems, and do they want to be that reliant in that environment on those two other critical systems, which is my storage, which has usually been separate, and my network, which has often been separate as well. And so I think what Hock Tan is saying is, am I delivering best of breed? And is best of breed, or if I'm living best of breed or good enough, is that good enough for my VMware environment? And it could very well be. So, and if you can show me a better TCO than doing it separately, then maybe I'll do it. We've seen it.
Absolutely. Camberley, first of all, thank you to your family for their service. And I do agree with you that PTSD is not something we should throw around lightly. That being said, I had, not as strong as a reaction as you did, but I also had a reaction as, look at the guy who wants us to move to private cloud saying we have PTSD over using public cloud. It's a little self-serving. He might have tried to put a little velvet around the fist, but
hey, Alan, can I jump in for a second? Because
sure,
evidently, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, but did Tan also say that silos of data center tech have left tech teams screwed? Basically, what I'm trying to get to is that Patrick Moorhead.
Well, part of it.
Yeah, right. So I just want to make sure he used that word.
Yep. Yeah, no, he was
I'll just make a
candid in
quick
his
point.
language, if that's what you're looking for. Yeah, but
that's
I don't
kind of what I want to say is that. Oh, let me just say one thing, and I'll get out of your way. So Patrick Moorhead, who's a very well-respected analyst that we all know, put it pretty well. He said it's been a long time since he's seen a CEO drop so many direct truth bombs in a Q&A. And I think Tan went on to say that CEOs have fell in love with the promise of public cloud a decade ago and directed their IT teams to adopt it. But since then, they've learned that, as you said, Mike, it's costly, complex, and hard to meet compliance. So my only point is that he is doing this kind of rough talk as a CEO selling a product, because I think he also mentioned that the fix for both problems that he had mentioned is on-prem IT, and conveniently, VMware's Cloud Foundation Suite does that. So I think there was somewhat
that's the point I was making, which is,
exactly. That's why I wanted to jump in.
Let's clear up some of the technical facts here first, and let's get rid of the hyperbole. So what they are pitching is that VCF can run anywhere. You can deploy it on any public cloud. You can deploy it on any on-premise environment you want, and you get portability and flexibility. And they're trying to replicate a cloud environment that can run anywhere, because when you go to the cloud today, I mean, there isn't really somebody up there who runs networks and storage. It's one integrated team, and you kind of run that as one cohesive unit. And they're saying now you can have that same kind of operating environment anywhere you want. They are arguing that the cloud is challenging and there's more of your data, they're making a data gravity argument for the on-premise side of the thing, where they're saying, look, this is where your data already is and this is where your compute is, and you need to bring these teams together and lower the total cost. Now, that is also, the part that they're not talking about during the keynote is this whole issue that they're having with people objecting to the way they changed the licensing terms. You used to have a perpetual license for VMware, and now you're having a subscription license. And for a lot of people, that's more costly over time. Broadcom is arguing that we're delivering more value for that increased cost because you're getting more software and more components.
Well, it's not just more value. Look, I was a vendor for many, many years. And this is the same old argument. Yes, my product may cost more, but your total cost of ownership, your TCO, is going to be lower. And that's what they're saying, that moving from the perpetual license to this new model, your TCO.
So I would bring up to the TCO, and I agree with you. And when TCO, typically when we have done as an analyst firm, have done TCO analysis, we've stuck to the hard numbers. And we've added some of the soft numbers, which is usually the operational expenses kind of thing that you have in there and into that space. There is some hard numbers. I mean, we haven't done the full VCF piece of it, and I suspect that they presented some of those numbers there. We'd like to peel those apart and see what they're looking at. But we have, our team looking at, do I use a vSAN kind of environment or do I use a network attached storage there? And by the way, it was less costly. But now that's a little bit, that was a while ago. I'm not sure what it looks like now with the new VCF costs, but at that point in time, there was a value proposition. Now, the trade-off was the functionality of vSAN enough to compensate with some of the functionality that I might have gotten with network SAN. We didn't do it with NSX because I didn't play in that space. But I suspect there might have been a similar kind of conversation along those lines. So I think, let's look at what hard TCO analysis looks like and then understand what the trade-offs are from a vendor dependency, a blast radius, and in the operational systems.
It's a really good point, Camberley, because it's sometimes is even more important what you don't include in your TCO, your total economic value analysis. It's kind of like spreadsheets. You can make spreadsheets say whatever you want to say, right? If you cast it the right way. So, and I think that there's a bit of that happening here. It's hard to believe that, we're all living in a world of whatever regret about moving to the cloud. I think there is truth to the data gravity and location and not wanting to move data around if it's already located in private data centers and wanting to be able to do more, a cloud-like private cloud in the data center. I mean, from my standpoint of coming from trying to move an IT organization into the cloud, this is what I wanted, and we were a VMware shop. This is what I wanted from VMware in 2012, is make my private environment look like my public environment. Yep. And then I'll stay on VMware, and that's a simple ask that's very complicated to deliver, obviously. But the pricing model, Mike, is a double-edged sword, right? Because it can cost more overall. But for people who are tighter on capital, crunch on capital, cash flow these days, there may be some areas where they can save capital expenditure using the subscription model. So there are advantages to that as well. And it's not in isolation, right? Because to your analysis you were talking about, Camberley, you can look at part of it and you can say, this is what this part looks like. But now we add in the network, we add in the storage, we add in security, we add in the other services that we're going to have to buy and run locally that we could purchase off the marketplace from a cloud vendor. And what does that cost? What's the cost to run those and the integration of those things in the cloud environment versus my own? And whenever you're doing it in your own environment, you're doing it all. You may be hiring people, vendors and such, to do that. So it's an answer looking for an audience to promote that answer, and I get it why he's saying that. So, but just put it in context.
But to your point about that also is most IT teams already have storage and networking stuff in place, and they have people who are trained on that and skills, and lifting that out and replacing that stuff is not easy. And people have attachments, right? So there's people who are Cisco shops or they're HPE storage shops, and just because the somebody put a spreadsheet in front of them doesn't mean that they're going to rip and replace that stuff.
You know, the
Absolutely.
other thing is we often see vendors pointing to cost of cloud, that public cloud's more expensive than private cloud, et cetera. You know, and I think this was a mistake or a fallacy that came into common IT culture some time ago, that the public cloud saves money. I don't think that was ever the case. I don't think the public cloud saves money. I think the public cloud gives you burstability, elasticity, scalability, and a shared model of responsibility on things like security and architecture and so forth. And there's trade-offs involved. But if you're just saying, look, the public cloud said it was going to be cheaper and it's not, I don't think you're being totally honest either. No, it's not cheaper, but it does offer you some advantages. The other thing I would mention, and I know in our notes here, there's a Cloud Native Now article on Tanzu being revamped. And did that come out this week as well, Mike? Or that came out
as well. You know, they're kind of talking out of both ends of their mouth on that one, you know.
Well, that's what's going to be my point, right? you want your cake and you want your ice cream too. And because wasn't that the promise of Kubernetes and containers, that we could run it on bare metal and we could run it private, public, in space or anywhere else on the edge?
Right. But at the same time, they will tell you can also run Kubernetes on VCF and you'll get the isolation of virtual machines. And isn't that a wonderful thing? So, you know, and they bundle it in there as an extension or what they call advanced services or whatever. So, you know, on the one hand, you could say, you know, they're trying to be all things to all people. And on the other hand, they're trying to say, you know, well, if you really must, we have Tanzu.
I think there's another thing that was emphasized in the announcements was the AI capabilities. They announced, you know, some AI products, but also there was assumption of, yes, there's an assumption that in your private data center, you're going to invest in a lot of AI hardware. I don't know. Is that seems to me a great instance of let's do those things in the cloud first if we can. And before we go plunk down a bunch of change to find out what we're investing in isn't the right thing. Right. So there's a lot of assumptions around everything belongs back in the private data center, which I don't think is true.
Well, I think we also understand what hardware is going to be used on premise, because the big amount of hardware that's being purchased right now, had been purchased right now, is for the LLMs and foundation models. And that's, you know, whatever, hundreds, a couple of hundred companies, maybe 300 companies are doing that. When we come down to the enterprise, that environment that's going to be doing RAG work in creating their, you know, taking that foundation model, whatever, that's a much smaller environment. It's not using a massive hundreds of GPUs. And so I think that's kind of understanding what that data pipeline kind of thing, of course, I'm a data person. The data pipeline looks like is important to understand what kind of gear is going to go in there at the enterprise. So it's much smaller than what we've been seeing.
I would point out there are a lot of hardware vendors here cheering Hock on. They're like, yay!
I bet there are.
Hardware is sexy again. Yay!
No, but hardware is gotten
sexy. You need them to be successful. So from an analyst perspective, is I want to see him successful. I want to see Tanzu successful because we need alternatives to just OpenShift. If we only have OpenShift, we're going to end up in the same place we just ended up with VMware being the only selection. Or you know, sorry, SUSE. I mean, I know SUSE is very strong in Europe, but over in the United States, it's OpenShift. Yeah. And we need more than one option.
And OpenShift is a major lift. It's a big lift.
Yeah.
Absolutely is. You know, we're going to talk about something related to that, OpenStack, in our next segment, and it's about time for that. We're going to take a break here on Techstrong Gang. We're coming back at you with what's up with OpenStack. It's back. I don't know. We'll see. You're watching Techstrong Gang.
Cloud Native Now is the web's leading resource for the growing cloud native ecosystem. CloudNativeNow.com is your destination for news, thought leadership, features, and webinars on cloud native architecture, Kubernetes, serverless, cloud native application development, microservices, service mesh, cloud native security, and more. Stay on the cutting edge of modern application development at Cloud Native Now.
All right, folks, we're back and we're continuing to talk a little bit about cloud infrastructure, but this time it's all about OpenStack. ever since this whole controversy involving VMware showed up, the OpenStack community has been kind of banging the drum a little bit, saying, hey, we're back and we're an alternative over here. And this week, Red Hat delivered an instance of OpenStack that runs natively on Kubernetes. All the components of OpenStack are now essentially microservices that you can deploy and choose as you want on top of Kubernetes. And this whole tension between OpenStack and the Kubernetes community has been around as long as I remember. But Camberley, let's get started with you a little bit. What is going on with OpenStack these days? Because I feel like for the last few years, it was kind of quiet.
Well, from what I understand, it has been quiet. It's been quiet in the United States. We saw with my prior company, we had quite a few IT end user companies that had implemented or tried to implement OpenStack. And this is going back to 2012 and those kind of dates where they're trying to provide cloud-like operations for their folks there. A lot of those just kicked it out because it was too difficult. Over in Europe, it was well received, and they have put a lot of resources into OpenStack, so it's alive and well over there. And I understand. I think Mike more. It's very alive and well in the telco industry as well. So I think that's where it is today. So this is an evolution, I guess, of keeping OpenStack alive and part of the conversation and part of the implementation, but maybe not for just the everyday enterprise that we see here in the United States.
It's a good point because OpenStack is a major technology for the telecom industry, and they made early investments in it to kind of get it where it is today. A lot of it is driven by NFV, network function virtualization, as the network has been virtualized operating in it. But what's interesting about this is there is a trend of running infrastructure on Kubernetes instead of Kubernetes just on infrastructure software, if you want to think of it that way. And some of it is because of the manageability or you're kind of moving from a monolith piece of software that's infrastructure software to managing it in more componentized or services orientation. So we're not necessarily getting a better Kubernetes in OpenShift. What we're getting is a better OpenShift running on Kubernetes because it's more manageable.
Yeah, and I think that point is critical because one of the issues with Kubernetes, despite, various claims to the contrary, is it's hard to manage that puppy, and it still requires engineers, and it's not something in my mind just yet that the average IT administrator is going to be able to run. I mean, there's some GUI tools, but they only take you so far as I can see, and as a result, I feel like that's constrained the adoption of Kubernetes, even though it's 10 years old, because I have to have the people and the skills to deploy it before I can even get to the benefits.
Well,
I'll solve it.
I'll check my Excel formula, but I believe if you add a complex system to another complex system, you get a simple system. But let me check that.
Square. They call that the complex square model.
Wait a minute. But my TCO is better.
It's better.
Yes. So I want to just point out a couple of things. It's not just OpenStack running on Kubernetes. It's OpenStack running on OpenShift, which is Red Hat.
Yes.
Right. And let's be clear about that. And then, Mike, you did an interview with Mark Collier, the head. He's from the Open Infrastructure Foundation, which is sort of the managing foundation for OpenStack. And then I met with Kevin Carter, who appears to be the champion there at Rackspace, who said, "Hey, we're back in the OpenStack camp, and we're big believers in the Open Infrastructure Foundation, and we were one of the original OpenStack patrons, and we're gonna, we're back in doing this in a big way." Okay, and he laid out a whole bunch of different offerings, enterprise-grade offerings that they're rolling out now on OpenStack. I don't want to get into my foundation's better than your foundation, but I don't know. I don't hear a lot about the Open Infrastructure Foundation. Is it just OpenStack, or is there more to it? Do they have the critical mass? I mean, where the Linux Foundation and Cloud Native, and the daughter foundations for LF are out there, and they're pretty well funded and they getting the job done. Is the Open Infrastructure Foundation Is it helping or hurting OpenStack? Would it be better in a Linux foundation?
It might be better because you would get more cross-pollination across Kubernetes and OpenStack. So I think that might be helpful. On the other hand, though, the CNCF and all that stuff, you go look at the number of projects they have and your eyes cross. And it's very hard to manage all that. So there's an argument to be made for focus. With one like consortium focused specifically on OpenStack. I don't really know how many folks who are working on both who are kind of sharing knowledge behind the scenes with each other. That would probably be a good thing. But I think you can assume that a lot of the things that Red Hat did to run OpenStack on Kubernetes will be contributed back to the OpenStack community, and then everybody will benefit. But right now, of course, they're doing their standard thing, which says, license all your open source stuff from us because we'll take care of you, and it's complex.
Well, they did rebrand in 2023, right? They were OpenStack Foundation. Now they're Open Infrastructure. So I think the intent behind that, because I went to that conference last year, and that's their intent, has become more than OpenStack. But let's be straight about it. It is some 90+% OpenStack, and it's OpenStack at very large scale. Because when you're talking about telecom, banking, and industries that are using OpenStack, they're not putting it in a few data centers. They're running very large implementations of it, and so it has, in some ways, it has a narrower focus to be able to scale to those kinds of business applications. Will it become more other open infrastructure? Then you're kind of getting into the Linux Foundation game. So, to me, that part of it competes with the Linux Foundation.
Agreed. I think, and then on the rack space piece of it too is, is this hot and cold running water? How long is this hot water running? Because, they've come and gone before kind of thing. And that was in talking to Kevin Carter, as I mentioned, that I didn't specifically ask him that question, but a similar question. And he said, no, it's an ironclad commitment to OpenStack and the future of OpenStack. But in many ways, it goes back to the previous, VMware thing. Are we seeing vendors say, hey, the bloom is off the public cloud, come back home. Come back home to the private cloud. Come back home to your own data center. Look at all these great old new tools we have for you to use. And maybe there's a story there. John, what do you think?
From my perspective, we're in a multi-hybrid cloud environment, and that's it. Now, we've heard the numbers, or I've heard the numbers being somewhere between 60 and 80% is still on-prem.
Anything?
For the enterprise. So, if we start slicing and dicing the different companies, the big enterprises are still on-prem. And the crown jewels are still on-prem. SMBs have probably moved up there. So, we are in this hybrid environment, and we're going to be. I don't think it's going to stop or it's going to slow down. So, I'm not sure why I would argue this. If I'm consulting with a vendor, they've got to have a joint strategy, because the customers are going to look for a joint strategy. Where the best placement is for it is whether or not, the enterprise is one of the biggest applications for doing, multi-cloud or hybrid cloud is going to be data protection. I use that as the poor man's DR. The other areas I'm looking at is this, do I start my training up with AI up in the cloud because it's less expensive, or I can get a hold of GPUs? Probably. Do I use global file sharing where I need to be able to share files into the very, very broad cloud environment? So there are certain applications that make sense to say it's going to be hybrid. Let's kind of embrace both sides of it and not choose, winners and losers on this.
I think
I agree.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, spot on, Camberley, and there's also new use cases that increase the need for hybrid. Edge being a perfect example, right? Edge is not going to be in your data center, obviously, but you want to run as much common infrastructure, including Kubernetes or K3, K0, as well as I'd like OpenShift at the edge if that's what I'm running in my cloud or my cloud and on Rackspace, whatever it looks like. I'm sorry, Mike, go ahead.
Well, here's the irony of this whole thing in my mind. And when I was much younger, they used to tell me that, nothing good happens when you move data. And then the cloud came along and we were moving data into the cloud left, right, and center. And we had these appliances called snowballs and we were doing all this stuff. And, but the maxim back in the day was, if you move data, you have security issues, your costs will go up and things will become more complex. And here we are. Now, it seems like we're coming full circle with the rise of AI. We're talking about bringing the compute to the data again. And I think every vendor out there is trying to ride that curve, whether it's VMware or OpenStack or whoever. They're like, woo, we're going to bring compute to the data again and we got to refresh the compute. And I think there's wisdom in that advice. But now, we've done the cloud for 10 years. So now the cow is half over the fence. There's data in the cloud and there's data on premise, to Camberley's point. So you could argue that, not so much that we are screwed as Mr. Talk was talking about because of the cloud. We're just screwed on both ends of it.
Well, and there's no such thing as half pregnant or half married.
Absolutely. All right. Hey, let's take a break. We'll give this one a rest. We're going to come back, and as we've been touting all morning, we're going to talk about controlling Scope 3 emissions. You're watching Techstrong Gang.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Techstrong Gang. Well, there's a type of carbon emissions that you may not be familiar with because this isn't the type of direct emission that we're used to controlling in our daily lives or even at work, like when we turn off the lights or reduce power. These are known as Scope 3 emissions, and they encompass everything that's not even a direct cause, let's say, of an organization, meaning emissions that are released throughout the process of the supply chain, from transport, delivery. It's a lot to take in and a lot to account for. And companies are really grappling with, how do we calculate this? How do we mitigate the risk of all these emissions? And with changing regulations that are happening in Europe and in the US, it's becoming a priority for companies. So I decided to take a closer look at Scope 3 emissions to better understand what they are and also what are organizations and the top tech giants doing to reduce them and report them. Tech companies are battling an invisible giant, Scope 3 emissions. These aren't just the carbon output from office lights or server rooms. We're talking about the emissions lurking in every corner of the supply chain, from the rare earth metals and chips to power fueling customer devices. For DevOps, cloud, AI, and digital transformation companies, this problem is particularly precarious. Your products may be virtual, but their impact is very real. Plus, the urgency to address Scope 3 emissions is palpable. From government mandates like the EU's Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive to investors demanding transparency, identifying and reducing indirect emissions is a rising priority. How are tech companies handling these issues? Microsoft is leveraging its cloud capabilities to develop advanced carbon accounting tools. Google is working with suppliers to decarbonize its hardware supply chain. And Amazon is revising packaging to produce less waste. The race to reduce Scope 3 emissions is also spurring innovation, like carbon-aware software that optimizes for low-emission periods. For organizations just starting the journey to reduce Scope 3 emissions, don't wait for the perfect data. Start now. Engage your suppliers. They're likely facing the same pressures you are. Blockchain, AI, IoT, and remote sensing can offer unprecedented insights into Scope 3 emissions, resulting in better measurement, reporting, and reduction strategies. Those who crack the code will not only future-proof their business, but also unlock new markets for low-carbon innovations in an increasingly climate-conscious market.
Well, in the video, I mentioned Microsoft, Google, and Amazon and what they're doing to calculate Scope 3 emissions. But also, this really is a huge issue because it encompasses the whole supply chain. So there's so many different players involved in calculating these emissions and understanding it. And that's one of the reasons that we saw a delay in some of the sector-specific reporting for the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive out of Europe, because it is such a big issue to take on. But regardless, these emissions and this reporting for global companies that are doing business in Europe or based in Europe in 2025 are going to have to start reporting this. So it is coming to the forefront.
You know, Bonnie, it's interesting. I did not know the scope of Scope 3, so to speak. I didn't realize it encompasses business travel, employees commuting, use and disposal of products, transport and distribution of goods and services. And I think there was a statistic that 75% of the emissions generated by all businesses fall under Scope 3. It was kind of staggering. Also, you mentioned the EU's Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. So from what I understand, the SEC's new rules do not extend regulatory oversight on Scope 3 reporting, but they eventually are going to move in that direction.
There's a lot of, they were supposed to have a decision on that within the past year, but it hasn't happened. There's been pushback politically. So it's not firmly noted there. But if you look at the state of California, there are some more regulations coming in regarding carbon emissions. But Scope 3 is an entirely different animal because it is encompasses so much. And I think we'll see more of the Scope 3 reporting talk about, I think, into 2025. But it is something that the major tech giants are dealing with now, and something to think about as you kind of, whatever business you have, because it affects the whole supply chain, the whole process.
And I'm really happy that they're actually doing this, and not because of the technology, of the technologists and Google and those kind of things, but I think that Scope 3, or actually looking at impact as we look at creation of technology, has a much bigger understanding. And so I'll take on two big industries that are very controversial. We could be very controversial. One is EV cars and the cost of mining for cobalt and everything that goes into those things. And the other one is wind farms and the cost, which is not measured in Scope 3, but it's the cost of the environment. It's the cost of the water. It's cost of the animals, that kind of stuff that are going on. And me being in Colorado and knowing that the state right up the street there, Wyoming, is putting in these massive open fields that are out there, these wind farms, is kind of like going, okay, so why isn't the environmental people screaming and yelling about the animals and the what's going on up there? You know, what they're screaming and yell about the mining, but they won't scream and yell about a wind farm kind of thing. So I think this is indicative. What we're talking about is Scope 3 is indicative of what we should be doing in all industries, and looking at what does it take to create something from end to end to deliver a goods to the market. And that also includes, I think, and I know I'm way off the deep end, and that also includes labor. It includes the labor that we use to wear the clothes that we're wearing here, and what kind of labor we're using.
That's a great point, and it goes into the agriculture industry. And I was just thinking, the book that I wrote about climate change, I really dug into the coffee industry, and that's another place where you're dealing with the environment and fair labor and things like that. So yes, I do think you're right, Camberley. It is end to end, and it affects the whole supply chain, but including people as well.
Hey, they are doing stuff with animals, or at least they're trying. And yeah, I will just reveal that, yeah, I do read weird scientific journals from time to time, but they apparently are trying to re-engineer how cows chew grass so that they eliminate less methane.
Oh, Mike, yeah.
That's
sorry,
very
I took us
important.
way off of the technology discussion. So.
Yeah, somehow here, guys, we went But this is what
you
you
city
said,
boy.
Techstrong Gang,
That
for
doesn't happen in
informative
Nebraska and
tech news.
Iowa. Come on.
No, that regenerative agriculture is huge, and that is the part of a lot of a scope 3, and mitigating that risk.
A good friend of Alan's and mine, Terry Swack, started a company a few years back, 10 or more, sustainable mines all around the manufacturing process and the goods that go into manufacturing. So the whole value chain before it ever becomes something that you use, either in subsequent, creating products from or consume as part of a business. And she was in town a couple of months ago on a construction engineering and design conference, sort of taking things beyond the LEEDs standards and some of that. It is so complex and all the things that go into it. You can't solve it in 1 or 2 or 3, 4 steps. You have to just keep whittling at it, kind of like a quality issue or improving quality, is tackle it where you can make a difference now and start to make a difference later.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's funny. I was talking about this with some IT guys, and they were like, looking at me. We were having the conversation and their eyes rolled, and they looked over and they said, "You see all those trees over there? Those trees are still standing because we invented PDF files." So he said, "You're beating us up about IT and the consumption of energy all the time, but if it wasn't for us, there wouldn't be trees that are sucking in all that carbon." So there
Touche.
Well, I think the end-to-end...
the impossible food.
I'm sorry, Sean.
You go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, kind of going back to what Camberley was saying about end-to-end, one of the big issues with this Scope 3 is, okay, we went through our entire process, but then you might stop at the end. That's when the circular economy comes in. And then we start talking about, okay, how are we going to dispose of hardware effectively? What's going to happen in the wake of all of our actions at the end? So it's that whole process from beginning to end and then beyond. That's what I just wanted to point out. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to... No, so that's so sorry, Bonnie. It's interesting because the Impossible Foods people are not too far from where I live. And when I went down to talk to the CEO a couple of years ago, the whole thesis behind that company was about how inefficient the whole system is in terms of producing meat. And they were using that actually to sell the company more so than the product itself, saving the world and saving resources. So in a sense, it's a very, very long process that involves a lot of things that we're just not aware of. And so when Mike mentioned cows, what was that again? Cows chewing grass in a different way?
Yeah, the way their stomachs, they're multiple.
It all feeds into, so to speak, the argument of that company, at least Impossible Foods.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to do what I can to control Scope 3 emissions by ending this conversation right here. It's been a heck of a Techstrong Gang. I hope you all at home have liked it. Mike, John, Mitchell, Camberley, Bonnie, thanks for joining in. You know what? We'll be back tomorrow to wrap up our week before a long holiday weekend here on Techstrong Gang. Until then, though, this is Alan Schimmel, and I hope you've enjoyed today's gang.
I'm Bonnie Schneider, sustainability contributor to the Techstrong Group. I'm excited to introduce you to a groundbreaking new initiative from Techstrong Research, the Sustainability Pulse Meter. The Pulse Meter offers valuable insights into how environmental responsibility factors into tech purchasing decisions for key players in the industry. Position your company as a leader in the industry and differentiate from your competitors with the Sustainability Pulse Meter, offered exclusively from Techstrong Research.